Have you ever been in one of those meetings where the air just gets, heavy?
Oh, yeah, completely
Like a
honest.
project is suddenly spiraling out of control, or maybe a client is just aggressively pushing back on a core deliverable.
Right.
And without you even consciously realizing it, your body starts to physically change shape.
Yep, the tension just takes over.
Exactly. Your neck seems to just disappear. Your shoulders creep up so high they're practically touching your earlobes.
Like concrete.
Yes. Your upper back turns to absolute concrete. You're sitting in an ergonomic office chair staring at a spreadsheet, but your physical architecture is behaving as though you are about to be struck in the jaw.
It's bracing for impact.
Literally,
Mm.
your joints are sending high-priority distress signals to your brain.
And, it is a profound biological reaction. It really exposes a flaw in how we usually think about our professional lives.
How so?
Well, we tend to treat corporate stress as this purely abstract cognitive experience.
Yeah.
We tell ourselves it's just, numbers on a screen or words in an email.
Yeah, just business.
But the human nervous system is ancient. I mean, the body does not know the difference between a hostile board meeting and a physical confrontation in a dark alleyway.
Wow, so to the brain, an angry boss is a predator.
Exactly. The physical architecture of our bodies, and very specifically the shoulder complex, is just inextricably linked to how we process conflict,
Right.
how we defend our personal space, and ultimately how we make really complex strategic decisions under fire.
And that biological reality, that physical architecture, is exactly the foundation we are exploring today. So welcome to the deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
We have a genuinely massive, fascinating stack of sources to go through today. It's built around a highly original presentation created by Dr. Christophe Delong and Conexa Formation.
It's an incredible piece of work.
It really is. The work is titled The Shoulder of the Leader: Power, Instability, and the Control of Chaos. And I have to admit, digging into this material, it completely rewired how I think about business structure.
Oh, I had the exact same reaction.
Right, because they're taking advanced biomechanics, layering it with the neurosciences of trauma and stress, and then applying it directly to organizational strategy. It's a brilliant cross-disciplinary synthesis. What Dr. DeLong and Conexa Formation have essentially done is create a biological blueprint for modern business leadership.
A blueprint based on the shoulder.
Specifically, a professional boxer's shoulder. They look at it as the ultimate evolutionary model for how leaders and organizations handle immense stress,
Okay.
how they execute high-velocity actions under pressure, and how they protect what they call the personal perimeter.
So, to give you a roadmap for this deep dive, we are going to start by breaking down the frankly terrifying anatomy of the shoulder joint itself.
It really is terrifying when you look closely at it.
It is. Then we're going to analyze the extreme violent physics of a punch and map the neurophysiology of what happens to a brain under attack.
Right. And finally, we're going to look at the corporate solution. We are going to explore how artificial intelligence, specifically the frameworks being developed by Conexa, can act as a kind of digital rotator cuff to stabilize the chaotic modern business environment.
I can promise you, by the time we wrap up, you are never going to look at your company's organizational chart the same way again.
Or your own posture during a stressful workday, honestly.
Very true.
So to really grasp the metaphor of the leader, we have to start at the anatomical baseline, right?
Yeah, we need to look at the sheer biomechanical paradox of the shoulder. Because when we talk about the shoulder, we are dealing with a severe evolutionary trade-off.
Okay, lay it out for us.
First of all, the shoulder is not a single joint. It is a highly volatile complex of 5 synergistic joints that all have to act in flawless synchronization.
Wait, 5?
5.
I think most of us, myself included, until I read through this, just picture a basic ball and socket, like a joystick, and assume that's the whole mechanism.
Yeah, that's the standard misconception. And it undersells the complexity of what your body is doing every single time you reach for a coffee cup.
Okay.
The ball and socket you're picturing is just the glenohumeral joint.
Yeah.
But to make that joint work, you also have the acromioclavicular joint, which connects your collarbone to your shoulder blade.
Right, the AC joint.
Exactly. Then you have the sternoclavicular joint, connecting your collarbone to your sternum. And this is a detail that usually shocks people.
What's that?
That tiny joint at the base of your throat is the absolute only bone-to-bone attachment connecting your entire arm to the rest of your skeleton.
Okay, let me pause you there because I had to read that line in the research 3 times. My entire arm The bones, the muscle mass, the sheer weight of it is only mechanically bolted to my skeleton by one tiny joint near my windpipe.
That is the biological reality. Everything else is just floating.
That's insane.
It is. It's suspended and held together entirely by soft tissue, muscles, tendons, and ligaments.
Unbelievable.
Which brings us to the fourth articulation, the scapulothoracic joint. This is actually a false joint.
A fault joint.
Yeah, it's just your shoulder blade gliding freely over the curved surface of your rib cage, lubricated by connective tissue.
Oh, I see.
And finally, you have the subacromial space, which is a tight sliding space beneath the bony roof of the shoulder. All 5 of these distinct areas have to move in a perfectly orchestrated kinetic chain.
But let's zoom in on that main ball and socket, the glenohumeral joint, because this is where Dr. Delong's primary paradox really lies.
The paradox of mobility versus stability.
Right. In the Conexa presentation, they use an analogy that really stuck with me. They compare the shoulder joint to a golf ball sitting on a golf tee.
It's a highly accurate visual. If you look at the humeral head, the top ball of your arm bone, it's massive. It's about 40 to 50 millimeters in diameter, practically 2/3 of a perfect sphere.
Okay, so a big ball.
Now look at the socket it sits in, the glenoid cavity. It is not deep like a cup. It's practically flat, and it's tiny, measuring only about 25 by 35 millimeters. The congruence ratio, the ratio of the surface area of the ball to the surface area of the socket, is an astonishing 1:4.
A 1:4 ratio.
Yeah.
You have this heavy, dense bone sphere resting against a tiny, flat plate. I mean, if an engineer built a bridge or a car axle with a 1:4 congruence ratio, they would be fired immediately.
Oh, absolutely.
It sounds like a catastrophic design flaw.
Well, it sounds like a flaw until you look at the evolutionary requirement. I mean, why did human anatomy evolve this way?
To use tools.
Exactly. We needed to free our upper limbs from walking so we could manipulate tools, build shelters, and, crucially, throw projectiles like spears to survive.
Right, you need a big wind-up.
To do that, we needed an extreme range of motion. The human shoulder can move 360 degrees. It is the most mobile joint in the entire body.
Okay.
But physics dictates a strict trade-off. To achieve the ultimate freedom of movement, evolution had to completely abandon structural bone stability.
Because if the socket were deep, like the hip joint, we wouldn't have the range.
Exactly. Consider the hip. The hip is a true deep ball and socket. The femur locks deeply into the pelvis.
Very stable.
Incredibly stable, meaning you can put hundreds of pounds of load on it and it won't pop out.
Yeah.
But the range of motion is severely restricted. You can't rotate your leg 360 degrees.
Right, that would be terrible.
So to give the arm its ultimate reach, the bone stability was stripped away. As a result, the shoulder is entirely dependent on dynamic stabilizers.
Meaning muscles.
Yes. It relies 100% on the active tension of your muscles and the passive tension of your ligaments just to keep the arm from falling out of the socket under its own weight.
It's an engine of immense power that is inherently constantly on the brink of dislocation.
That's a great way to put it.
I'm trying to picture a modern equivalent for this. It's like building a multi-million-dollar high-performance hypercar, but to make it the fastest thing on the track, you completely remove the heavy steel chassis. You strip out the physical safety cage, so you have all this raw, explosive horsepower, but you're relying purely on an invisible onboard computer, the anti-lock brakes, the traction control algorithms, to keep you from spinning out into a wall at 200 miles an hour.
That is a brilliant parallel, and it leads directly into the organizational translation that Dr. Delong and Conexa Formation are making.
Tell me more about that translation.
Look at the modern corporate landscape. Look at highly decentralized, agile startups or massive tech firms trying to pivot. What do they want?
They want maximum mobility.
Exactly. They want to be able to strike instantly, innovate rapidly, and move freely without a heavy bureaucratic framework, the deep hip socket holding them down.
They want the 360-degree range of motion.
They do. But what they often fail to realize is the biological law of the shoulder. That ultimate freedom makes the organization inherently, fundamentally unstable unless it possesses incredibly robust, invisible systems of coordination holding it together.
So the thesis here is that you cannot have ultimate freedom without ultimate regulation.
That is the core tenet. The more freedom, power, and agility a leader or a company wields, the greater their range of motion, the stronger and more responsive their internal stabilizers must be.
Makes sense.
If a visionary leader tries to wield massive external power without a deep, highly calibrated, stabilizing structure operating quietly underneath them, They will literally dislocate their own organization.
Wow.
The structural integrity will fail long before the market defeats them.
Okay, so if the human shoulder is this highly volatile, inherently unstable engine, a golf ball balancing on a tee, how does it perform under the ultimate, most punishing stress test imaginable?
That is the big question.
Which leads us to a really interesting choice in the source material. Why did Dr. DeLong specifically choose the brutal, bloody arena of boxing as the framework for corporate leadership? I mean, why not use tennis? Why not swimming or gymnastics?
It's a crucial distinction. If
Yeah.
you look at the sports biomechanics of tennis, for example, it is primarily an exercise in force transmission. The tennis player is using a kinetic chain to move power from the ground through the legs, through a relatively locked core, and out into an external tool, the racket.
Right.
The resulting injuries are usually repetitive wear and tear pathologies. Swimming is about cyclical, rhythmic traction against fluid resistance. But boxing is anatomically unique.
How so?
Boxing forces the shoulder to exist in a state of absolute contradiction.
A contradiction because of the offense and defense.
Yes. The boxer's shoulder must instantly alternate between acting as an impenetrable shield to absorb devastating impact and a split second later transforming into a ballistic weapon.
Ah, I see.
It has to endure massive compressive forces when blocking a blow and then immediately execute high-velocity rotational forces to throw one.
A shield and a weapon. It has to absorb shock, survive, and return fire in milliseconds.
And this dual function introduces a vital psychological and physical concept, the reach, or what the French sources refer to as le range. In the context of boxing, your reach is the physical, biological definition of your personal space. It is the perimeter of your safety.
Okay.
When a boxer throws a jab that quick, straight, leading punch, they aren't usually trying to knock the opponent out. They are using the jab as a proprioceptive probe.
Let me stop you there. Proprioceptive probe. That sounds like something you'd find on a deep-sea submarine. Break down what proprioception means in this context.
Fair enough. Proprioception is your nervous system's internal map of where your body parts are in three-dimensional space, even when your eyes are closed.
Right.
It is how you can touch your nose in the dark.
Yeah.
In boxing, a proprioceptive probe means using the physical extension of the fist to gather spatial data.
Okay, that makes sense.
The boxer throws the jab out to measure the physical distance between themselves and danger. They're feeling out the environment, defining the exact boundary where their secure territory ends and the threat begins.
I love that. They are basically pinging the environment like radar. Am I safe here? How close are you?
Yes, and consider what happens when that radar detects a breach. When an opponent slips past that jab, breaches the perimeter, and steps inside that critical safety distance, the brain reacts instantly.
The stress response.
Exactly. This brings us deep into the neurology of stress, specifically the interplay between the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex.
The limbic system being the older, more primal part of the brain, right?
Exactly. The limbic system, housing the amygdala, is our ancient primitive survival engine. It processes fear and immediate physical threats.
And the prefrontal cortex.
The prefrontal cortex, situated behind your forehead, is the seat of logic, long-term strategy, and complex rational decision-making.
So when the boxer's perimeter is breached, the amygdala basically sounds a massive alarm.
It overrides the entire system. Under attack, whether that is a physical right hook coming at your jaw or a domineering manager aggressively micromanaging your project and invading your professional autonomy, the amygdala fires.
It dumps adrenaline.
It floods your bloodstream with adrenaline and cortisol. And critically, it triggers an involuntary physical reaction neurologically termed the startle reflex, or the reflex de retrait, the withdrawal reflex.
Is this what causes the posture changes we talked about at the very beginning of the deep dive?
This is the exact mechanism. When that alarm sounds, your upper trapezius muscles, the thick muscles running from your neck to your shoulders, automatically violently contract.
Pulling the shoulders up.
They yank the entire shoulder complex upward to shield your vital organs, specifically the neck, the cervical spine, and the carotid artery.
So your brain is literally screaming, "We're under mortal threat, protect the blood supply to the head," even though the threat is just a highly critical email from the finance department.
Right.
The body cannot tell the difference between a predator and a spreadsheet.
It cannot. The physiological response is identical. And this is where Dr. DeLong points out a devastating pathology for leaders.
What's the pathology?
The startle reflex is designed to be a momentary life-saving reaction. But what happens when that conflict becomes chronic? What happens when you are operating in a toxic corporate environment where you are constantly under subtle attack, but professional decorum dictates that you cannot strike back or physically flee.
You can't punch your boss, so you just stay in that locked, tense, defensive posture permanently. You just absorb the stress.
And medically, if a joint is held in a defensive, immobile state for too long, it leads to a condition known as frozen shoulder or adhesive capsulitis.
Frozen shoulder, I've heard of that.
The joint capsule literally thickens, scars, and shrinks around the bone. In the Conexa framework, a frozen shoulder is the ultimate biological manifestation of unexpressed chronic conflict.
That's a powerful way to frame it.
It is a functional paralysis born from a toxic ecosystem. When the mind is trapped, when the leader cannot articulate their boundaries or reestablish their perimeter, the body eventually takes over, screams stop, and literally locks the joint so you cannot engage with the world anymore.
That is deeply unsettling. The sources actually provide a very specific illustration of this. They describe a boxer who comes into the clinic unable to throw a simple jab without agonizing pain.
Yes.
On an MRI, maybe there isn't a massive acute tear. The pain is the body refusing to engage because it feels structurally and psychologically unsafe. The boxer is experiencing a violation of their perimeter, and the shoulder shuts down to prevent them from entering combat.
Yes. Now map that directly to a corporate executive. A leader with a metaphorically or literally locked shoulder for someone crippled by chronic anxiety, trapped in an impossible hierarchy, stops taking proactive, strategic actions.
They stop throwing jabs.
They stop measuring the market. Instead, they make purely reactive, defensive decisions.
Because they are leading entirely from their amygdala, just trying to survive the next 10 minutes, rather than leading from their prefrontal cortex and planning for the next 10 years.
They are bracing for impact. They lose their reach. And an organization led by someone without reach cannot probe for new opportunities. It can only wait to be hit.
Okay, I want to pivot slightly. To truly understand why the shoulder locks up, why it fails under the stress of this environment, we need to look under the hood at the mechanics.
Let's do it.
We need to look at what Dr. Delong calls the muscle wars happening beneath the skin. Because the joint isn't failing on its own, it's failing because the muscles trying to control it are fighting a civil war.
This is where the biomechanics start to resemble a classical tragedy. We have to look at the specific actors in this war. First, let's detail the famous rotator cuff.
Okay.
In French clinical terms, the coiffe de rotateur. This is a group of 4 deep, relatively small, often neglected muscles.
Let's name the players.
You have the supraspinatus, which sits right on top and initiates the lifting of the arm. It is the most exposed and vulnerable to injury.
Supraspinatus, got it.
You have the infraspinatus, sitting on the back of the shoulder blade, which acts as the vital external brake for the arm.
The brake.
You have the teres minor, a smaller muscle that assists that braking action. And finally, on the hidden front side of the shoulder blade, you have the subscapularis, a massive, powerful muscle that acts as the main motor for twisting the arm inward.
Okay, so 4 deep muscles forming a cuff around that tiny golf tee.
Yes. And their primary directive is not actually brute movement. Their job is microstabilization.
Microstabilization.
As you move your arm, these 4 muscles fire in a complex symphony to act as a centering force. They are constantly dynamically pulling that massive humeral head down and tight into the center of the tiny socket, keeping it perfectly aligned.
Right.
But then on the outside, you have the antagonist in this story, the deltoid.
The deltoid, the massive, showy muscle that gives the shoulder its rounded shape, the one everyone spends hours doing lateral raises in the thumb to build.
Exactly. The deltoid is the brute force motor. This is the elevator. When the massive deltoid contracts, it forcefully pulls the arm outward and up. However, because of the angle at which the deltoid attaches to the bone, it doesn't just pull the arm up. Its sheer force also pulls the ball joint violently upward, right toward a hard piece of bone sitting directly above the joint called the acromion.
Let's talk about the space between those 2 bones, because the research highlights this as the ultimate danger zone, the subacromial space.
Right. It is a tiny anatomical gap. In a healthy adult, that gap is normally only 7 to 14 millimeters wide. Think about how small that is.
Barely half an inch.
And your vulnerable supraspinatus tendon has to thread the needle right through that gap. Every time you lift your arm, that space naturally narrows even further. Wow. If the system is working, the unsung heroes of the rotator cuff actively pull the ball down at the exact same moment the deltoid lifts the arm up, ensuring the tendon slides cleanly through the gap without getting pinched.
But we are talking about extreme stress. What happens to this delicate balance when the boxer is in the 10th round, completely exhausted, just swinging wildly to survive?
The system breaks down. Under chronic stress, In deep fatigue, the massive deltoid becomes hypertonic. It becomes dominant and rigid.
Overpowering the smaller muscles.
Exactly. The small, deep muscles of the rotator cuff become exhausted. They lose their tension. They fail to pull the ball down.
And then...
So the deltoid completely overpowers the system. It rips the humeral head upward and physically smashes it into the hard acromion bone above.
Ouch.
If that 7-millimeter gap drops below 6 millimeters, you get mechanical conflict. The tendon gets violently crushed between two grinding pieces of bone with every punch.
I want to stop and really underline the corporate parallel here, because it is brilliant.
It really is.
In a company, the deltoid is your aggressive, forward-facing department. It is your sales team. It is your brute force execution. It's the department tasked entirely with driving top-line revenue, pushing outward, and lifting the company's valuation up.
It is the visible muscle of the organization.
Yes. And the rotator cuff, those 4 deep, invisible, stabilizing muscles, represent your middle management, your legal compliance teams, your HR, your deep data analysis, your supply chain logistics. They are the internal processes holding the structure together.
Centering forces.
Exactly. And the Conexa thesis argues that if a CEO pushes for massive, aggressive growth, constantly flexing that corporate deltoid to hit quarterly targets without simultaneously funding, strengthening, and resourcing their internal processes, the rotator cuff, they will literally crush their own organization.
Yep.
The sales team drives the revenue up, but the exhausted internal stabilizers fail, and the company's operational capacity gets smashed against the ceiling of its own infrastructure.
You get a mechanical conflict.
Exactly. Fulfillment fails, compliance is breached, and the company tears its own tendons.
That is the tragedy of biomechanics mapping perfectly onto business strategy. You cannot safely exert maximum external force without maintaining maximum internal stabilization.
Because a hyper-dominant sales team will destroy a weak logistics team.
And bring the whole company down with it. Which raises the massive million-dollar question for modern executives. How do you strengthen an internal rotator cuff that is complex, invisible, and frankly, unglamorous compared to the flashy deltoid of a new product launch?
And this is where the core offering of Conexa Formation enters the picture.
Yeah.
This is their vision for artificial intelligence. They aren't trying to build AI to replace the CEO or write marketing copy.
No, not at all.
They've used specialized AI as the ultimate, tireless, artificial rotator cuff of the enterprise.
It is a highly strategic application of the technology. Conexa posits that AI doesn't need to be the fist throwing the punch. It needs to be the deep algorithmic system processing massive amounts of internal data.
Right.
Instantly predicting friction points in the supply chain, and automatically centering the operations. It handles the invisible, high-speed coordination that humans are simply too slow to manage at scale.
So by offloading the massive cognitive burden of microstabilization to an AI letting algorithms manage compliance, inventory tracking, and data flow, the human deltoid of the company, the creative leaders, and the sales teams can strike with absolute full power.
Exactly.
They then throw massive punches safely, knowing the AI is managing that subacromial space, keeping the company from crushing itself under the weight of its own execution.
Precisely. It enables high-velocity execution without structural burnout. It changes the equation of risk.
I want to transition from the internal muscles to the actual delivery of the strike. We know the deltoid wants to lift and the cuff wants to stabilize. But how do these forces actually synthesize to generate a knockout blow in the real world?
That's fascinating, too.
And more importantly, according to the research, where does the punch usually go catastrophically wrong? Let's dissect the anatomy of a punch.
The visual and textual biomechanical data provided in the presentation is incredibly detailed here, because the first rule you learn when analyzing punching power is entirely counterintuitive.
Right.
The power does not come from the shoulder. The shoulder is merely the final delivery mechanism. The power of a devastating cross is entirely generated from the ground up.
The kinetic chain, walk us through it. Put us in the shoes of a heavyweight boxer. Where does the movement begin?
It begins with gravity and the floor. The initiation of a powerful cross starts with a massive ground reaction impulse. The boxer drives their foot into the mat, activating the calves and the quadriceps.
Generating force from the legs.
Right. That kinetic energy travels up the leg into the hips, where the glutes fire violently to lock the pelvis into place. Once the pelvis is anchored, it provides a stable base for the real engine to engage. The rotational torque of the trunk, powered by the obliques.
So we are essentially twisting the core of the body like a giant coiled spring, generating massive rotational torque.
Exactly. The torso twist, whipping the entire upper body forward. As that wave of kinetic energy hits the shoulder complex, a critical specialized muscle fires, the serratus anterior,
The boxer's muscle.
often literally referred to as the boxer's muscle. It sits on the ribs, under the arm. Its specific job is scapular protraction. It violently yanks the shoulder blade forward, sliding it along the curve of the rib cage.
And what does that sliding action accomplish?
It artificially extends the length of the arm mid-punch. It adds a sudden, unexpected 10 to 15 centimeters of reach to the strike.
That is the phantom punch. That's that extra few inches of sudden extension that sneaks past the guard and catches the opponent completely off guard.
Yes. And at the exact millisecond that shoulder blade flies forward, the subscapularis, that massive internal rotator on the front of the shoulder blade, detonates.
Detonates.
It internally rotates the humerus, twisting the arm inward. The biometric stat highlighted in the text is staggering. During a professional cross, the internal rotation of the humerus hits rotational speeds of 9,000 to 11,000 degrees per second.
Wait, 11,000 degrees per second?
Yes.
I need to pause and contextualize that. If an object rotated a full 360 degrees in 1 second, that's 360 degrees per second. 11,000 degrees per second means if the arm could keep spinning, it would rotate roughly 30 times in a single second.
It's hard to even picture.
That is the RPM of a redlining sports car engine occurring inside human flesh and bone.
It is an explosive, terrifying release of kinetic energy. And finally, the shoulder flexes, the tricep fires, the elbow extends, and the fist snaps into the target, transferring all that rotational torque into the opponent's jaw.
Boom. The punch lands. The crowd goes wild. But here is the massive plot twist in the Conexa analysis.
Right.
The true critical danger to the boxer's physical longevity isn't the impact of hitting a solid object. The danger is what happens next.
No, the real biomechanical terror is the deceleration phase. Think about the physics involved.
Yeah.
You have a massive human limb weighing 10 to 15 pounds rotating at 11,000 degrees per second.
Right.
After the impact, or, God forbid, if the boxer throws a massive haymaker and misses the target completely, hitting nothing but air, that staggering rotation has to be brought to a complete halt instantly, or the arm will literally tear itself away from the torso.
Anti-lock brakes have to kick in.
Yes, and this is where the concept of eccentric contraction becomes vital. Normally, a muscle shortens when it fires, like doing a bicep curl.
Sorting under tension, yeah.
But during deceleration, the infraspinatus and the teres minor, the braking muscles on the back of the shoulder, have to engage in a brutal maximum capacity eccentric contraction. This means they are trying to contract and pull back, while the immense forward momentum of the arm is physically ripping them longer.
They are acting as bungee cords trying to stop a speeding truck.
Precisely. They had to absorb all that forward kinetic energy and break an 11,000 degree per second rotation to zero in mere milliseconds.
That sounds incredibly damaging.
It is an eccentric load that creates immense structural shearing. That rapid deceleration phase is where the catastrophic microtears happen in the tendons. It is where a boxer's shoulder is systematically, invisibly destroyed over the course of a career.
I am translating this to a corporate strategy right now, and it is a massive light bulb moment.
Let's hear it.
Let's say a tech company decides to launch a highly aggressive viral marketing campaign, or they acquire a massive new competitor. That is the punch.
Right.
The entire executive board, the media, the shareholders, they all focus on the launch, the kinetic impact, the initial sales numbers. But according to this model, what actually destroys the company isn't the launch, it is the deceleration. It is the immediate aftermath.
Yes, the momentum management.
Exactly. It is the sudden crushing customer support load. It is the supply chain trying to fulfill 10 times the normal orders. It is the sudden need to manage all that generated market momentum without ripping the company's internal structure apart.
It's the back end catching up.
Right. If the executive team throws a massive corporate punch, but they don't have a strong organizational infraspinatus, if their back-end operations, their server architecture, and their Conexa AI stabilizers cannot act as the brakes and manage that sheer momentum, the company suffers severe operational micro-tears.
The system tears itself apart from the inside, and the sources highlight one specific type of punch to perfectly illustrate this catastrophic risk of unchecked momentum, the uppercut.
Let's talk about the uppercut. Why does the research single this punch out?
Because anatomically, the uppercut is the most complex, unnatural, and dangerous punch a human can throw. A straight cross works somewhat with the horizontal plane. An uppercut defies gravity.
Going from bottom to top.
It starts low and explodes vertically, and because of the mechanics required to drop the arm and thrust it up, it completely opens up and exposes the fragile architecture of the shoulder joint to violent shearing forces.
How does a boxer throw an uppercut without destroying their own arm? What is the mechanical secret?
The secret lies in the anchor. To throw an uppercut safely, your serratus anterior, that boxer's muscle on the ribs, must perfectly, rigidly anchor the shoulder blade against the rib cage.
Locking it down?
It has to create a foundation made of stone.
Mhm.
If that shoulder blade isn't absolutely locked down, the explosive upward force of the massive deltoid firing will just yank the entire unanchored shoulder complex violently upward toward the neck, ripping the stabilizing tendons right off the bone.
So if you throw a wild uppercut into the void, if you swing for the fences trying to knock a guy out but he leans back and you hit thin air because your brakes failed and your anchor wasn't set, you risk ripping your own arm out of its socket.
You do. All that violent kinetic energy, with no external target to absorb it, has nowhere to go but to reverberate back into your own soft tissue, tearing the joint apart.
The corporate translation here is so visceral. In the business world, the uppercut is the equivalent of a highly disruptive market pivot. You are a traditional company trying to suddenly disrupt the entire industry from below, defying the gravity of the market.
Right, a massive shift.
You decide to launch an untested, radical new business model. But if you execute that vertical pivot without a solid internal anchor, without your deep AI systems ensuring your data integrity is flawless, your cash flow is locked down, and your processes are rock solid, the sheer unbridled force of that rapid vertical growth will cause instant organizational burnout.
You will tear your own structural integrity apart trying to disrupt the market. The deep data, the AI frameworks, the rigid internal protocols, they are the serratus anterior.
They hold it all together.
They hold the company's operational foundation tight against the rib cage, while the visionary executive team attempts to throw the disruptive, world-changing uppercut.
But what happens when all of this fails? We have spent the last 30 minutes talking about throwing punches, analyzing the offense, looking at the deltoid and the serratus. Let's flip the script.
Okay.
What happens when the defense collapses? What happens when the stabilizing system is completely overwhelmed by a catastrophic hit it never even saw coming? This brings us to the system crash, the KO.
To understand a corporate collapse, a true bankruptcy of operations or leadership, we have to deeply understand the intense, horrifying biology of a physical knockout.
It's not pretty.
No, it's not. What is genuinely fascinating, and what most casual fans don't realize, is that a KO in combat sports is almost never the result of a bone breaking or a localized physical trauma to the face.
It's not about breaking the jaw.
Exactly. A knockout is fundamentally a neurological event. It is a catastrophic electrical failure caused by the rapid rotational acceleration of the brain inside the skull.
Because the brain is essentially a soft mass floating in fluid, correct?
Yes, it's suspended in cerebrospinal fluid. It is designed to withstand a certain amount of linear impact. But when a boxer takes a clean, unexpected hit to the point of the chin, the jaw acts as a mechanical lever.
Snapping the head around.
That lever violently snaps the head and rotates the skull. The heavy brain, due to basic inertia, lags behind the movement of the skull and then violently twists inside the fluid, shearing against the rough interior bone of the cranium.
Sloshing around and twisting. And what is actually happening at a microscopic cellular level during that shearing motion? Why does the boxer drop?
The physical twisting literally stretches the microscopic axons, the wiring of the neurons. This violent stretching physically yanks open the ion channels embedded in the cell membranes.
Yanking them open.
Normally, these channels open and close in a highly regulated sequence to send electrical signals, but the trauma rips them open all at once. Massive amounts of potassium rush out of the cells, and a flood of calcium rushes in.
Creating a storm.
The brain is instantly saturated with an uncontrolled, chaotic storm of contradictory electrical signals.
It is total, absolute information overload.
Precisely. The brain is receiving too much chaotic, conflicting data to process. So, as a desperate biological protective mechanism to prevent permanent cellular death, the brain initiates a hard reset.
It reboots.
Gets in safe mode. It instantly cuts the power to the body, resulting in a total loss of consciousness and a complete collapse of postural muscle tone. The muscles go slack, and the boxer drops to the mat.
The brain literally turns itself off to stop the chaotic data flow from frying the hardware. That is an unbelievable, chilling parallel for a business leader facing an unprecedented crisis. Dr. Delong calls this the informational KO.
And it is a phenomenon you see in boardrooms all the time.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Imagine a leader who is suddenly hit with a massive compounding crisis, a viral PR disaster, followed instantly by a global supply chain collapse, compounded by a sudden crash in stock price.
Too much data.
The cognitive capacity of their prefrontal cortex hits a hard ceiling. They experience the exact same information overload as those flooded ion channels in the boxer's brain.
The data comes in too fast, it is entirely contradictory, and they cannot process the variables. And what do? They freeze.
They freeze. The neurological link between the brain, the strategic planning center, and the shoulder, the execution mechanism, is completely severed. The leader cannot make a decision.
Paralysis.
They become functionally paralyzed. And without the leader providing active postural tone, the organization loses its structural integrity and collapses into chaos on the mat.
Okay, the nightmare scenario has happened. The system has crashed. The leader is frozen. The PR disaster is unfolding. The company is on the mat. The referee is counting. How do they get back up?
Right, the recovery.
And more importantly, from an evolutionary standpoint, how does the biological machine ensure that it never gets hit by that specific punch ever again?
This is where Dr. Delong's synthesis moves from diagnosing the trauma to explaining the recovery, introducing the critical concept of neuroplasticity.
Neuroplasticity.
When the boxer eventually regains consciousness and returns to the gym, the brain does not just passively heal the stretched neurons, it actively analyzes the failure. It uses neuroplasticity to physically rewire its own architecture.
I want to dig into that. How does the brain physically change itself to prevent a future KO?
Well, the brain isolates the memory of the trauma and identifies the specific neural circuits, the specific motor pathways that should have fired to slip the punch or raise the guard.
Finding the optimal path.
Once it identifies those optimal pathways, it begins to actively fortify them. It wraps those specific neurons in a thicker layer of a fatty substance called myelin.
Myelin. I've heard the term, but let's define its actual function.
Think of myelin as biological insulation for your internal wiring. Just like thick rubber insulation around a copper electrical wire prevents signal loss and speeds up transmission, a thicker myelin sheath around a nerve fiber allows the electrical signal to travel down that pathway exponentially faster.
So the brain literally upgrades its own physical hardware in response to a failure. It wraps its wiring in thicker insulation so the survival signal travels faster next time. It is forging a physical memory of success.
Yes, it is an evolutionary marvel. The next time that boxer's in the ring and their peripheral vision registers the exact same slight drop of the opponent's shoulder that preceded the knockout punch months ago, the visual data travels down that newly hypermyelinated super-fast pathway directly to the motor cortex,
Bypassing the thought process entirely.
triggering an automatic, flawless dodge a split second before the conscious thinking mind even registers the threat.
The dodge becomes an instinct, not a decision. And this is the moment where Conexa and AI transition from being just a tool to becoming the ultimate corporate cheat code.
Absolutely.
AI acts as a digital flight simulator for the business. It can process thousands of past market crashes, past supply chain failures, past PR disasters.
And by modeling those millions of past data points, the AI builds highly complex predictive scenarios. It learns to identify the macroeconomic tells, the slight drop of the market's shoulder, so to speak, that signals a recession or a supply shortage.
Conexa structures these success memories into the very DNA of the company's data architecture. The AI processes the chaotic data and establishes automated algorithmic response protocols.
Right.
So the next time global shipping rates spike or a competitor drops their price by 20%, the executive team doesn't have to consciously panic. They don't have to convene a slow, terrified boardroom meeting to process the threat.
The AI has already flagged the anomaly, adjusted the pricing algorithms, and rerouted the supply chain. Avoiding the crisis becomes an automatic organizational reflex. The AI provides the thick myelin sheath for the company's data pathways.
Oh, brilliant.
It perfectly shifts the company's operational state from reactive survival to proactive automated maneuvering. However, there is a massive caveat in Dr. Delong's work.
Oh, what's that?
To build this neuroplasticity, to develop these highly reliable, predictable success reflexes, whether biological or algorithmic, the environment itself must adhere to a rigid set of boundaries. You cannot build functional, predictable reflexes in an environment of total, lawless chaos.
Because if the environment has no rules, the brain can't predict anything.
Which brings us to a fascinating segment of the research, focusing on the ultimate sin in combat sports, the low blow.
In any deep systemic analysis of conflict, you cannot just look at what happens when things work perfectly. You have to look at what happens when the fundamental rules of engagement are shattered.
A kuba, or a low blow, is defined as a strike that intentionally targets the vital integrity of the opponent outside the mutually agreed-upon perimeter of combat.
It is a fundamental violation of the social contract of the sport.
Yes. And physiologically, a low blow is uniquely devastating. It does not just cause intense localized pain, it causes a massive, overwhelming visceral shock to the autonomic nervous system. It drops blood pressure and collapses the body's entire postural tone instantly.
And reading through the clinical observations in the sources, there's a fascinating, almost tragic irony regarding the low blow. They point out that a low blow frequently ends up causing a severe injury to the receiver's shoulder.
It is a common clinical presentation,
Yeah.
and the mechanics explain why. When the vital visceral organs, the groin or the abdomen, are struck, the body's ultimate, most primitive survival reflex overrides everything else.
The hands drop.
The boxer will wildly, involuntarily throw their arms down to clutch their stomach to protect the organs. They drop their high guard so violently and with such uncoordinated panic downward traction that the sudden force literally rips the humeral head straight down and out of the glenoid socket.
The low blow directly causes a shoulder dislocation.
Exactly.
That is incredible. So an illegal, unexpected attack on the vital core forces your body into a panic reflex that physically destroys the very weapons and shields, your shoulders, that you need to fight back. What does this biological reaction tell us about the psychology of the environment we operate in?
It highlights the absolute, non-negotiable necessity of a predictable, rule-bound framework for high performance.
Predictability is key.
We often tend to think of rules in sports, like the Marquis of Queensberry rules in boxing, which mandate gloves, ban hitting below the belt, and forbid striking a downed opponent as annoying restrictions. But psychologically and neurologically, rules exist not to limit action, but to strictly enable elite performance.
Let me play devil's advocate here. Don't rules inherently restrict freedom? How does a rule telling a fighter they can't kick make them perform better?
Because it frees up cognitive bandwidth. If you are a professional boxer stepping into a regulated ring, and you possess the absolute certainty that your opponent is bound by the rules to only punch above the bell, your brain does not have to worry about defending your knees, your groin, or your back.
You can focus all your energy on the actual fight.
You can dedicate 100% of your cognitive resources, your prefrontal cortex, and your physical readiness to analyzing the upper body geometry, defending the head, and calculating a strategic, complex counterattack. The rules create a safe perimeter.
But if you are in an environment where literally anything can happen,
If you're in a street brawl in a dark alley where low blows, kicks to the knee, weapons, and eye gouges are all permitted, your brain simply cannot predict the vector of the threat. The variables are infinite.
so without rules, we are just brawling in an alley,
Yeah.
and our brains literally downgrade our own intelligence to keep us alive.
Yes. In a lawless environment, the brain stays permanently locked in the amygdala. It remains in a state of hypervigilant, exhausted survival mode.
Always bracing for the low blow.
You are constantly bracing for a visceral attack from any direction, which means you can never relax your nervous system enough to access the strategic, forward-thinking, creative parts of your brain. You cannot build that highly myelinated neuroplasticity because the threats are completely random and patternless. You cannot learn. You can only survive.
Translating this directly into the corporate world, this paints a chilling portrait of a toxic workplace. This is an environment defined by unfair competition, rampant corporate espionage, or internal politics where a micromanaging, abusive executive constantly moves the goalposts and attacks employees personally.
It's awful.
It is a system completely saturated with professional low blows.
And in that specific environment, the employees and the leaders are functionally paralyzed. Their metaphorical shoulders are permanently locked up by their ears. They're trapped in survival mode.
They can't perform.
They cannot innovate. They cannot calculate the risk required to throw a disruptive uppercut. They are spending all their energetic resources just trying to protect their vital organs from their own colleagues.
This is where the entire Connexa framework brings the biological and the digital perfectly together. In the chaotic, often toxic corporate world, Connexa and its AI frameworks act as the ultimate impartial referee in the ring.
And that is a crucial, underappreciated function of artificial intelligence. We talk about AI writing code or generating art, But we rarely talk about AI as the guarantor of systemic integrity.
An algorithm doesn't get scared.
An AI algorithm does not feel the paralyzing emotion of a low blow. It does not get swept up in toxic office politics, fear-mongering, or the panic of an unpredictable market swing. It objectively, cold-bloodedly monitors the system. It instantly identifies when operational rules are broken, when ethical compliance processes are violated, or when financial data deviates from a predictable trajectory.
It constantly sanitizes the professional perimeter. By automating regulatory compliance, strictly monitoring internal data flows, and ensuring that core processes are rigidly adhered to without bias, the AI ensures that the rules of the ring are maintained. It prevents the internal low blow.
And by reliably maintaining that highly secure, predictable perimeter, it fundamentally changes the human experience of work. It allows the human leader's energetic and cognitive resources to be spent entirely on studying the opponent and winning the match.
Because they trust the system.
The leader can inherently trust that the AI is watching the lower perimeter for foul play, which frees up their prefrontal cortex to strategize, to anticipate market shifts, and to execute complex high-velocity movements without the constant draining fear of a visceral shock collapsing their entire structure.
Okay, let's take a deep breath and pull all of these massive concepts together. We have been on an incredible interdisciplinary journey today.
We really have.
We started with the sheer terror of the human shoulder's 1-to-4 biomechanical instability ratio, the heavy golf ball balancing on the tiny tee, illustrating the eternal trade-off between ultimate freedom and necessary regulation.
Right.
We explored the brutal, explosive physics of a punch and realized that failing to decelerate 11,000 degree per second momentum is what truly tears a corporate system apart from the inside.
The eccentric load.
We looked at the neurochemical flood of an information KO, where the brain short-circuits under chaotic data, and we examined the absolute necessity of predictable rules to keep us out of our primitive, fear-driven amygdala.
And weaving through all of this, we have seen how the brilliant synthesis by Dr. Christophe Delong in Conexa Formation successfully maps these intense biological, physical, and neurological realities directly onto the architecture of modern business.
It's profound.
They have presented artificial intelligence not as a replacement for human execution, but as the great operational stabilizer, the digital rotator cuff that manages the microscopic, invisible coordination, allowing a company to wield massive external power without dislocating its own operations.
So, to you, listening right now, wherever you are, do me a favor. Do a physical systems check. Really, pay attention to your body right now.
I'm checking mine too.
Where are your shoulders resting? Are your upper traps currently locked in tension? Are they creeping up toward your ears even as you listen to this? Are you operating your day from your amygdala, constantly bracing your posture for a professional low blow?
That's a great question to ask yourself.
Or are you operating from your prefrontal cortex, trusting your systems, dropping your guard slightly, and serving the field for opportunities? Ask yourself, are you relying entirely on the exhausting brute force of your deltoid, your sheer willpower and your sales numbers, to drag your company through the week?
Or have you done the deep, quiet work of building the smart stabilization of your rotator cuff? And as you reflect on your own biomechanics and your organizational structure, consider this final provocative thought. We have spent an hour today talking about how AI can act as the ultimate stabilizer, the shock absorber, and the invisible referee for your business's shoulder.
Yeah.
But think back to the evolutionary trade-off we discussed at the very beginning of the deep dive. Evolution intentionally sacrificed the bone stability of the deep socket to grant humanity the ultimate freedom of a 360-degree range of motion. It allowed us to manipulate tools and change the world.
Right.
As artificial intelligence matures and takes over more and more of the tedious rotator cuff duties, the deep, invisible regulation, the compliance monitoring, the predictive bracing for market impact, what happens to human potential?
What do you mean?
What new, entirely unprecedented uppercuts will human creativity be freed up to throw? If we, as leaders and innovators, no longer have to spend 90% of our cognitive and structural energy just managing friction and bracing for impact, just how far can our ultimate freedom of movement actually take us?
Will we finally be able to stop fighting our own anatomy, drop our shoulders away from our ears, step out of survival mode, and truly swing for the stars? It is a massive paradigm shift and definitely something to think deeply about as you go back to your day. That is all the time we have. Until next time, keep exploring the connections.